But tonight was a lesson that really was planning to give last month, and that's on the topic of love. As you know, our theme for this year is faith, hope, and love, which all three words come from the latter part of 1 Corinthians 13, that this is the more excellent way that Paul is showing the Corinthians, and that of faith, hope, and love is the greatest of these things because it's not something that vanishes away. Love is the solution for the problems that they had been having at Corinth up to this point in the letter that he's addressing, specifically the things pertaining to spiritual gifts from chapter 12. And so tonight we're going to be introducing the topic of love and trying to get a good grasp of what it means. I'm not going to spend time defining the different words that are used for love in the scriptures. We've heard things like that, and we will talk about that in some future lessons, no doubt. However, tonight I want us to look at 1 Corinthians 13 from maybe a little bit different perspective than we traditionally have in other times. Among the married in this audience, there's probably been a great majority of you that have had 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8 in your wedding ceremony. That it may be something that you went to Hobby Lobby or some other place and you found a real nice wooden plaque that has love is, and it has these characteristics. And there are about 15 different characteristics that are mentioned here, but this is not going to be a 15-point lesson. Because many of these really are, I think, better understood when we look at them combined with with the ones that are right beside it. And also if we compare it to the letter itself. So that's what we'll be looking at tonight. So let's see notebooks if you're ready for your three words. All right, very cool. Your three words are words, thoughts, and actions. Words, thoughts, and actions. As was read for us a few moments ago, Paul said, though I can speak with the tongues of angels and of men. Love, he's going to demonstrate, is more than being able to speak well, to speak in ways that could be considered angelic. He says, it's more than what we think. Though I have the gift of prophecy, able to understand all sorts of mysteries. If I don't have love, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything if I'm super intelligent, can understand all sorts of riddles. If I don't have love, I'm nothing. Give my body to be burned. Sell all of my possessions, give it to the poor. Love is more than just actions. Because you do what Paul is talking about doing in that passage, and that's a huge sacrifice. Obviously, this would be the person who loves. And Paul says, no, just because you do that doesn't mean you love. There's a lot of things that we can do that when we consider just the actions themselves, we can confuse that with what the Bible describes as doing things and being what love is supposed to be. The words that are used to describe love in this passage are not adjectives as we sometimes look at them in the English language. But in the Greek, each one of these is a verb, an action verb, an ongoing and continuing verb. That love is patient and kind, or love suffers long and is kind. That doesn't mean that at one occasion it suffers, and each individual occasion that it has to, it suffers. But love is always suffering, maybe say suffering long. It's patient. But because of the demand that's placed upon it, it's something that's always supposed to be in the forefront of our mind. And it is the thing that brings about the solution to many of the problems that we may be having, because it's always about working. Think, if you will, of a husband that he tells his wife, I love you. And he brings her flowers and candy, and he takes her out to dinner. And you look at that and you say, that's a man who loves his wife. However, if I said he tells her I love you right after he belittles her to the point that she is crying and upset and completely distraught, that he brings her flowers and candy, but it's only after he's been stepping out with someone else and she finds out about it, that he takes her out to dinner, but it's no place that she would want to go. It's only because that's where he wants to eat. Same person, same scenario, but more information is given. And so what Paul is doing in this chapter is he's talking about, look, there's a lot of things that you have, and there's a lot of things that you can brag about. That's chapter 12, these spiritual gifts that you have. But they're not profiting you anything, because the thing that matters most about these things, love, is missing. And so you're not using these things. These things are not because you care about one another that you have them and are using them, but it's only to exalt yourself. And so as we go through this list of the things that love is, remember that it is a list of verbs and a list of actions that are there. Because as we said, love is a lot more than what we say, a lot more than what we think, and a lot more than the things that we do. So, first and foremost, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting at verse 4, Paul says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love," beginning of verse 8, "never fails." So what does it mean then when we talk about love? And how does it make you feel that the first thing that Paul begins with in the New King James is that love suffers? But it is the word for patient, because what we're talking about is suffering long. But when we're talking about patient, we're not talking about anticipation of something. We are talking about the patient that is suffering long with someone else. It's not suffering long with and being patient in the midst of circumstances. It's being patient, it's being kind to individuals. What the Corinthian congregation was having a lot of problems with is that they were not suffering long with another, and they were not patient with another. Some commentators, when they talk about the way in which this verb is used in this passage, is saying that you have an individual who has been wronged by another or slighted by another, or maybe someone owes him something, and they have the ability and power to put that other person into subjection and even take vengeance upon that person, but they choose not to do so because they are suffering long and are kind. We do see this in the Corinthian letter. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you remember that there were brethren who were taking one another to court. And Paul says that this is a shameful thing. When there's a problem within a congregation, the members of the congregation should be able to work that problem out. There should be somebody in the congregation who is spiritually minded enough, mature enough to handle this situation. That it's a shameful thing to take the problems and issues that we may have within a congregation and put them in front of the world. That is not the proper place for them. It belongs here that we work that out. And if someone has wronged another, we should be able to bring a remedy to that situation. This morning in our Bible class, we mentioned Luke chapter 15, and I think this is a really good example of it as well. And not just in this account in verses 4 and 5, but throughout the letter. That if a man has 100 sheep and he loses one, he's going to go out and try to find that because he loves that sheep that belongs to him. It is his. It is something that he has raised, he has spent time with, and he wants it back. And so when he goes to that sheep and finds it, he has to travel the mountains. He has to look into the valleys and the fields. He has to go on a long journey to find this sheep. When he finds it, he is happy that he finds it. He puts it on his own shoulders and he brings it back. He does not belittle it. He does not treat it with contempt. He doesn't make a bad example out of it so that the other sheep realize, don't be like this one. He doesn't do that. He's patient and he's kind to it. That kindness is an action where we seek to heal the wounds, just like in this. And if the idea of the sheep is not enough, then later in Luke chapter 15, Jesus uses another analogy of a man who has a son that basically says to his father, I wish you were dead because I want my inheritance right now. And then he takes the things that his father has worked for and laid up for all these years of his life that was a good steward of, that made sacrifices in order to do it. He takes it and he wastes it on unrighteous living. And yet the father is patiently waiting for his son to come back. And when his son comes back with the confession upon his lips that I am no longer worthy to be called your son, make me like one of your servants, his father interrupts him. Bring the robe, bring the ring. Let's have a feast because this son of mine who was dead is alive again. That's what it means to be patient and kind with someone else. Paul continues, though, that love does not envy. And there's a long list, if you notice in 1 Corinthians 13, of negative things that we should not be doing. And again, this is something that you do see in the Corinthian letter, to envy. And envy is the same word here as the word that's used many times for jealousy, that love is not jealous of another. You look in chapter 12, just one chapter before in 1 Corinthians, and you see how the church is compared to the body. And you have all these different members of the congregation that may have all these different talents and abilities. And all of them are part of the body. Some of them, Paul says, are honorable things in which everybody sees them and bestows honor. Some are not honorable. But upon those we bestow greater honor, Paul says, in that we cover them with bone and sinew and protective tissue so they're not injured. Or there are some things among us that we don't want it shown who they are because they're still in the process of growing and working and maturing, and they need to be shielded. But in all this, Paul says we're not supposed to be envious of one another, jealous. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 18 says that God has set each one of the members in the body just as he saw fit. And in verse 26, it says, and if one member suffers, then all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. One of the things I think happens, which should not happen, when jealousy comes up or when things, I guess the best way to put it is this, is that bitterness can exist and meanness, just outright meanness, can exist even among brethren. And it is a painful thing to say that, because to me there is nothing that's uglier, there's nothing that's less attractive than Christians who just have meanness to them. They don't like it if someone else has something that they don't. They seem to get upset if someone has success and they haven't. The way it usually comes out is constantly playing the victim, that, I don't have this, or I don't have that, or people are doing this to me, or people are doing that to me. As Christians, we should be able to react better than that. I appreciate what Derek said around the table, that living as a Christian sometimes does seem very hard, and there are hard things that we have to face for sure. But being a Christian ought not be that hard for us, because, brethren, we are blessed beyond belief. We have so much that the world, if they just saw what we really have, if we could show them what we really have, how much better would it be, and how much easier would it be to bring them to Christ? So we should not be envious people. Proverbs 14 and verse 30 says that a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones, and it will destroy you when you have bitterness and envy and strife within us. It's not meant to be there. Think about how bad it can actually get. You remember in the Old Testament with Solomon, that he was the wisest man. He'd asked God for wisdom, and God gave him all this wisdom. And one of the first times that we see that wisdom being exercised is that you have these two women. And it's a horrific story, that both of them have a child. One of them now is dead. They come to Solomon, and there's a decision supposed to be made about whose child is this. So Solomon says, bring me a sword, and we'll cut this kid in half, and we'll give half to one mother and half to the other. And one woman cries out and says, no, 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 let her have that child. And Solomon knew that that was that child's parent, because the other woman says, yes, sounds like a good idea to me. Because in her mind, if I can't have the child, no one can. And unfortunately, that is the kind of envy and jealousy that existed even among the Corinthian brethren. But love is the solution to keep that type of bitterness out of our souls and out of our lives. Paul continues in 1 Corinthians 13 that love does not parade itself. In other words, it's not puffed up. That word puffed up means inflated from the outside or inflated by blowing. These are people whose head has grown too big and much bigger than their heart. Because Paul says that we're not supposed to be the kind of people who are always parading ourselves and puffed up with things. Even in the Corinthian letter again, 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 6, Paul says, now these things, brethren, I have figuratively transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that you may learn in us not to think beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up on behalf of one against the other. For who makes you differ from another? And what do you have that you did not receive? Now, if you did indeed receive it, why do you boast as if you had not received it? Paul says, the things that you have and the ways in which you've been blessed, these things didn't come from you. It's not because of some personal attribute that you have that they were given. These were gifts that were given to you by God. And these gifts that were given to you by God, yes, they make a difference between you, but this difference between you was made that difference by God, not by you. So you really don't have anything to boast of. You've just been blessed. And so Paul says the things that I'm telling you, I'm applying these to myself and Apollos, because we're not to think beyond what is written, no matter if we're on the receiving end of a lot of those blessings or a few of those blessings. If these blessings cause us to stand out or maybe cause us to have to do things behind the scenes, doesn't matter. You receive these things from God. And so we should not be inflated, we should not be parading ourselves, and we should not be making examples of who it is that we think we are in our own sight. Another way in which this is shown is, you remember back in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus talks about the hypocrites, that when they do the charitable deeds, that as they're doing these deeds, they sound the trumpet so that they may be seen among men. We don't have parades for ourselves. We don't puff ourselves up that way. And another way in which it is when you think back to one of those other ones. Love suffers long and is kind. Someone wrongs you, or someone has sinned and done something. It may be hard, but we're supposed to suffer long with that person, be kind with that person in trying to bring them back. We're not envious or jealous of the fact that they seem to be getting away with it or something like that. And then here, we don't parade ourselves. We're not puffed up. Another way in which this is sometimes shown is that we want to have that "I told you so" moment. We want to be able to say to them, "See, this is what I warned you about." This morning when we was talking about Noah, one of the things I had thought about was saying, what if there had been a flag on the ark? What would it have said? And one of the things that I thought maybe it would have said is, "I told you so." And it would have been very fitting at that time. But it was not the way in which God wanted it handled. With this is the same thing. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. There's a lot of things, brethren, that we know are wrong, and when we talk to others about things that they have done wrong, we're in the right in that we've pointed out the sin, we've done what God has asked us to do. But if it's only so that we can tell them, "I told you so. See, this is what I warned you about." If that's what we're wanting, we're in the wrong. Make no mistake about it. The fact that the truth is revealed, and we're supposed to be rejoicing in truth, as we'll see in a moment, but when truth is revealed, it will have the effect upon the heart that is tender. You don't have to say that. And more than that, it's not in your realm to say that. That belongs to God. Paul continues, and I believe this goes along with that same type of idea, and that love is not rude. The Corinthian brethren were guilty of a lot of different rude things. In the very beginning, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, and they seem to be ranking one another according to who it was that had converted them or who it was they were following the beliefs of. They were gossiping about Paul and his motives for preaching the gospel. They would say things ugly about Paul. You know, he's a man who's very, very strong and mighty when he's writing these letters, but wait till you see him. He's not much to look at, and he's certainly not much to listen to. And they would say things like that, and it was just rude and ugly toward one another about these types of things. Even with their spiritual gifts, Paul would talk about in chapter 14 how it was that people were wanting to be heard, and that people, it seems, were speaking over one another and violating, as Sean even reminded us of tonight, the decency and order that we're supposed to have within a congregation. And they were just being rude to one another with this. They were being rude to one another when they observed the Lord's Supper, and that it was important for me to take the Lord's Supper, but whether or not you took it or not really didn't matter, just so long as I had mine. And there were those who did not have it when they were there with them, and they wouldn't share with them. And because of that, rudeness. Love is not rude. The reason that we teach our young people to say, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," "Yes, ma'am," "No, ma'am," is because love is not rude. It's something that I have noticed here in the past several years, which maybe because I'm older I'm noticing it, I don't know. But somebody coming up to the door, I was taught from a very young age, you hold the door for them. And that's what you're supposed to do. What I've noticed is that there are a lot of people who will walk through that door and not even acknowledge that you were there. And that is rudeness. That is one of those things that makes you think, why is that people have that attitude? Love means that we see the other. Love means that we know what is good for the other. Love is not, as we're going to also see, it's not interested only in self, but it's interested in another person. It is a motivating thing when we say thank you, when we say please. It is a motivating thing when we show respect and honor to someone who has done something for us. Love is not rude. We should know our audience. We should know who we're around. We should take thought for the things that we say. because it often can come across as being very rude. As Ephesians 4 and verse 15 teaches us that we are to speak the truth in love. Speak the truth, but do it in love, which means speak the truth, but don't be rude about it. Don't be ugly about it. Be polite. Be respectful in the way that you speak the truth to others. Matthew 7 and verse 12, the golden rule, whatever you want men to do to you, that's what you should do to them as well. You speak to others the way that you want them to speak to you. Don't speak to them the way they have spoken to you. Speak the way that you want them to speak to you. And if you were in their shoes, how would you want to be spoken to if you were in their shoes? That's what love does, and that's what love is supposed to do. Love does not, as Paul continues, does not seek its own and is not provoked. Love does not seek the thing that is only about them, because it's not about them to begin with. But it combines, and I believe it's supposed to be combined with this idea of being provoked. Another thing that is very off-putting about brethren from time to time is this idea that they're irritable, easily offended. The smallest thing upsets them. You say something and all of a sudden, well, I'm gone. There's plenty of other congregations in the area. I'll be there. Love does not seek its own. It is not irritable. Brethren, we shouldn't have to walk on eggshells with one another. We're not supposed to be rude. But if you're on the receiving end of something, you should not be walking on eggshells. It shouldn't be that everybody has to treat you with kids' gloves. You're not provoked. And we've all known people that it's so easy to set them off. That's not how Christ was. Oh, to be like thee, we sang just a few moments ago. And think about Jesus and how many occasions in his life it would have been so easy to be irritable. Jesus says, beware the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees. I knew it. We forgot bread. Okay. If there was a moment in the life of Jesus where he could say, are you kidding me right now? Did you not see how many thousands of people I have fed? And you're worried about bread right now and you don't understand what I'm telling you? Oh, you of little faith, for Jesus just to be irritable and easily provoked, the holy God of all creation, and for people to spit in his face, for people to slap him, prophesy to us, tell us who it was who struck you, to put a crown of thorns upon his head and hit him with a reed, to throw him upon a piece of wood and nail his hands and his feet to it, to yell at him even as he's on the cross, come down from the cross, we'll believe in you. Jesus was not seeking his own, and he was not easily provoked. It took a lot to get our Savior to exercise even a little bit of the wrath that he could have inflicted upon all of mankind. And so we have passages like Peter, 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 21. You remember this is about servants, these slaves who are being beaten by their masters, and being beaten by their masters for things they did not deserve to be beaten by. And Jesus said, or Peter reminds us that you're a lot like Christ when you take that patiently. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. The brethren in Corinth were having a problem of seeking their own, and they were easily provoked. And when it comes to things like eating meats and that had been sacrificed to idols, they were only thinking of themselves and not their brethren when these things happen. Paul says it thinks no evil. And this, brethren, I think is something we have to be constantly on guard about. It thinks no evil. There's a couple different ways in which that could be looked at. One is that it thinks no evil. In other words, it's not always having evil suspicion of another person. And I think that is right, but I think that's covered in one of the other things that are said about love in a few moments. This one here, thinks no evil, is the idea does not take into account wrongs. And I think some versions read it sort of that way. In other words, it's not record keeping of wrongs that another person does. In that way, it's saying that, this person has done this, and they've done this, and they've done this, and they've done this. So obviously they're going to do that again. It's their character. It's their nature. It's who they are. But we're not supposed to be record keepers. It is an accounting term. We're not supposed to be record keepers of wrongs that other people have done, even to us. In Philippians 4 and verse 2, remember you have these two sisters who seem to be at odds with one another. And it says in Philippians 4 and verse 2 that I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. They were both entreated. They were both encouraged to be of the same mind. Paul wasn't taking sides in the issue. He was saying, work it out and be of the same mind. I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers. And he reminds them that this is the thing. Your names are both recorded in the book of life. So work this thing out. It's not about record keeping. It's not that you come and you sit down with another individual and you show your scorecard, they show their scorecard, then the other person says, okay, this person wins, you repent and apologize. That's not what Paul is doing here. What Paul is doing here is he says, look, you get on the same page with each other. However that needs to be, you get on the same page with one another. Don't be thinking evil of one another. What you are supposed to be thinking is both of our names are recorded in the book of life. So let's work this out. And you may need help. And so seek that help and get that help as well. Paul continues in 1 Corinthians 13 where it says that love rejoices in the truth. It does not rejoice in iniquity. One problem that exists in our world, just as it did in Corinth, was that there are those who rejoice in iniquity, who rejoice that there are things that are being done wrong, who celebrate it. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 is a good example that they had this man who had his father's wife. And Paul says, rather than getting rid of this evil person, delivering this evil person over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, for the salvation of a soul, you are puffed up about this thing. You're glorying in this thing. And this is not right. You should not celebrate the fact that you had this and that you're so patient, you're so understanding, you're so kind, you're so accepting. That is not who we are as Christians. Sin is never a thing that we are accepting of. It doesn't matter who commits it. It doesn't matter the reason they commit it. It doesn't matter if other people are accepting of it. We as Christians are not, ever, because it is not loving. We rejoice in the truth, never in iniquity. Remember, it is an ongoing thing and not circumstantial that Paul is using these verbs. It is an ongoing thing that you are always rejoicing in the truth and that you are never rejoicing in iniquity in any occasion whatsoever. We see this in Romans chapter 1. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against ungodliness and unrighteousness of man who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And then in verse 32, as we said even this morning, there are those who are just like it says here, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death. The people not only do the same, but they also approve of those who practice them. Never, ever, under any circumstances, there is never an excuse. There is never a yes, but, ever an occasion where we give approval to that which is wrong. Ever. Because love only rejoices in truth. Always and forever is the way it's supposed to be. And so then Paul ends with this, and this seems to be the summation and how he begins to wrap up 1 Corinthians chapter 13 when he says that love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. Love endures all things. In other words, love is something that is willing to, as this word is, bear all things. It's not the word that's used to carry a burden for someone else. The word bear here is the idea of bearing, in other words, that you cover something, that you protect something, that you take the responsibility for protection of something else. That's the idea of the word that's used here for bearing all things. In other words, if someone needs protecting, you're going to be there. If someone needs help, you're going to be there. If someone needs to be shielded from something, you're going to be there. You're going to come to the aid in every occasion for your brother or your sister. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. I hope and think nothing but the best about my brothers and sisters. And it is sometimes difficult, yes. But it's one of those things that we have to purposely make ourselves do, that love believes all things. they didn't mean it that way. They didn't say that because. They said this because they meant something good. It just didn't come out right. They did this because they're immature and they don't know better yet. I believe all things. Love hopes all things. It has a forward look that this person is going to grow into maturity. This person is going to be profitable for the work of God. This person means the best in the things that they are doing. And love endures all things. In other words, love puts up with everything. That's how we word it. It puts up with everything. We do this until we are absolutely forced to do otherwise. You have to be absolutely forced to do otherwise. Because as Paul concludes in verse 8, love never fails. When I look at what Paul says in this chapter, and I realize that this is how God himself is. This is who Jesus is. That it wasn't just who they are, but as we've been saying, this is what they did. This is how God reacted to me. God has suffered long with me. God has been kind to me. God has not been envious or jealous of me. God does not parade himself and boast about himself to me. God is not seeking his own or being rude. He's not easily provoked. All of these things are the way in which God has reacted with his creation because of how much he loves us. We are to emulate that. As difficult as it sometimes may be, this is what we're striving for. And this, Paul says, is a solution to a lot of the division and hardship and problems that they were having in Corinth. So the question I'm going to leave with you tonight is this one. Is this your definition of what love does? When we think about interacting with others, we're going to talk about throughout our lessons this year, or the remainder part of this year, on interacting with other people, especially some of those difficult interactions. How do we treat someone? How do we show love to someone? How do we love our enemies? How do we love people who are unlovable? What kind of love did God show to us, and what can we learn from that? If there's something else along these lines that you would like us to discuss in a sermon, let me know. I'd be glad to work something into the schedule with that. But over the next few months, let's think about loving the way that God loves and see if that does not help us in the relationships that we have with others and even the world around us. If you're subject to the invitation tonight, understand God loves you as well. He sent his son to die so that you can have the forgiveness of sins. We have the waters of baptism that are ready for any who are ready to have their sins washed away, to go home this night without a sin in your soul. That's a tremendous blessing that God offers. If that's something we can help you with tonight, please let us know as together we stand and sing.